Hi. Hello, everybody. Welcome to week 3. This week, we're going to explore the current state of conservation law enforcement, which means we're going to discuss the various types of conservation officers and where they're located. The readings for this week will introduce you to a variety of different conservation officers at various levels of government, as well as introduce you to some international natural resources officers. Most of the readings are online resources, mainly websites for the various agencies, discussing the types of conservation officers they have, what those conservation officers do. But there's also an article that discusses, discusses the role and responsibilities of law enforcement rangers in Uganda. It's a really interesting article that looks at what conservation officers in the country of Uganda do. So broadly speaking, conservation officers are part of this larger group of officers known as natural resources law enforcement officers. Within this broad umbrella of natural resources law enforcement officers, there's quite a few different types of officers. There's park rangers, conservation officers, conservation agents, park police, forest rangers, special investigators, and some others. These officers all have a variety of duties, but they all have natural resources responsibilities. And these officers exist internationally, federally, state, and at local levels. And overall, there's about 7,000 state and federal conservation officers in the United States. So first, let's talk about international natural resource officers. Because of issues related to transnational pollution, trafficking of wildlife and plants, Interpol has had officers that specialize in natural resources crimes since 1992, when the Environmental Crime Committee formed. They restructured it in 2012 and turned it into the Environmental and Enforcement Committee, and it includes leaders from all 190 Interpol countries. So within this committee, there's 4 working groups. You have the Wildlife Crime Working Group, Pollution Crime Working Group, Fisheries Crime Working Group, and the Forestry Crime Working Group. So each of these working groups targets international threats specific to their particular focus area. So then other countries also have conservation officers. The article in the readings discusses Uganda, and then also in the readings there's some material about Kenya. Kenya is one of the most well-known countries that has wildlife officers. Conservation officers in Kenya are part of the security division within the Kenya Wildlife Service. Within the security service has various departments whose goals are to eliminate poaching and combat the illegal trade in wildlife species, in addition to a variety of other things. So also in Africa, there's CAMAFAC, which is the Central African Forest Commission. And this commission consists of 6 different African countries, and it was formed to increase collaboration between the countries to combat wildlife crimes. All right, so in the United States, there's conservation officers at the federal, state, and local level. So at the federal level, the main agencies that employ conservation officers are the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, the U.S. Forest Service, and the U.S. Park Service. But they're not the only ones. There's also the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, or NOAA. They have commercial fishing officers that regulate commercial fishing on the oceans, and then the EPA investigates pollution and other environmental crimes, and they have a form of conservation officer there as well. The Fish and Wildlife Service has 2 types of conservation officers. They have special agents and also wildlife inspectors. Special agents are essentially the FBI agents of the wildlife world. And the wildlife inspectors are stationed at airports, ocean ports, and borders to ensure that shipments into and out of the country comply with federal law. They inspect the shipments, but they also inspect individuals coming in and out of those places because much of the wildlife trade uses people as couriers. It wouldn't take you but a minute, to find some article, a news story about somebody that got caught with some kind of animals shoved down their pants or in their jackets. People all the time are trying to sneak wildlife in and out of, mostly into the United States. So then you have the National Park Service. They have park rangers assigned to each of the 390 national parks. They have 2 different types of rangers, protection rangers and interpretive rangers. So the protection rangers are the police of the park. And these officers have the highest rate of assault of all federal law enforcement officers. Forest Service has 2 types of conservation officers. They have uniformed forest rangers, and also special agents. So the Rangers perform the fairly typical kind of police role on Forest Service property, and then the special agents are plainclothes investigators, very similar to the Fish and Wildlife Service special agents. But the Forest Service focuses or only investigates crimes on Forest Service property. So in the United States, then, the largest number of conservation officers are at the state level. Each state has conservation officers in some form. Some states, like Missouri, we have both conservation officers, or what's called conservation agents in Missouri, and park rangers at the state level. Other states have conservation officers that also patrol the parks. So when you start looking at states, there's a lot of variation between states as far as jurisdiction, job duties, qualifications. So there really is no way to talk about all the different states and all the different varieties of state-level conservation officers. So we're going to talk about Missouri in here because we're in Missouri. But if there's a particular state you're interested in, you can find the particularities about that state online generally. So in Missouri, we have the Department of Natural Resources, and they're the ones that have the state parks. And they employ park rangers that are assigned to the state parks and perform law enforcement duties within the state park. Then you have the Missouri Department of Conservation that employs the conservation officers for the state, but in Missouri they're called conservation agents. Currently, there are around 195 conservation officers in Missouri, and they're all certified peace officers by the state of Missouri. And these conservation officers do law enforcement, they do educational programming, they do public relations work. Other states have a much more narrow role for their conservation officers. Some places all they do is law enforcement. But Missouri, they're charged with enforcing the Wildlife Code of Missouri as well as state and federal law. They conduct patrol, do surveillance work, have meetings, school programs, teach hunter ed classes, and also do public relations work, writing newspaper articles and doing radio and television shows. And they also do natural resources management work by meeting with landowners and discussing wildlife and fisheries management on that landowner's property. All right, so at the local level, in the United States, generally speaking, at the local level, natural resources officers are local park rangers. Most of these park rangers have law enforcement responsibilities. Some of them do public relations work, programming, that sort of thing in local parks. Kind of an example, before I was a conservation agent with Missouri, I worked for the St. Louis County Parks Department as a park ranger. I was assigned to some parks within St. Louis County. And I did law enforcement stuff there, and I also did some programming and that sort of thing. All right, so that's kind of a real quick kind of summary of the readings for this week. Please do take time and go through all the readings for the week. Go to all the websites and check out all the different types of conservation officers, and then be sure you do the assignments that are due for this week. If you have any questions, please let me know. And if not, I'll see you next week.